Yeah, good morning, everybody, and welcome to join us. We hope more people will come because we consider, as always, ethos is a very important topic. So let me just, quote this presentation in the sense that it's based on a publication that we done in last year, and the title is the same: Collective Action on Public Goods for Sustainable Development, and the subtitle is Action, Ethics in Action. And so the key message that we're trying to convey through this short presentation, now we know we have more time, so we will stretch a bit and bring in more content, is about the public goods, and the perpetuation of public goods will be essential for the achievement of sustainable development. And basically, our key message is to say that expanding public goods provision is synonymous to promote sustainable development. But effective coordination among all stakeholders, business or non-business, state or non-state, will be essential in making progress toward the 2030 end date. And so we would discuss this briefly. And let me move into the first slide that introduced this whole idea. We looked at the Jeffrey Sachs and his co-author in his very important 2019 publication, basically proposing that SDG implementation is actually kicking off a fundamental transformation in 6 important areas. And he classed them, the 17 goals, into 6 transformation areas for priority of investment. So the first one looks at the enhancing, now it's too small for me to see, so let me turn my own page. It's about education, gender, and inequality. That covers SDG 4, 5, and 10. That's the first cluster. And I think, from all the activists amongst us, we know, discrimination and inequality has become one of the major fault line for our societies. The second is transformation of health, well-being, and demographic. And we are aware that, I think yesterday there was already some panel discussion about the aging population in different societies, even in developing countries. The life expectancy has been prolonged due to the advancement of medical technology and pharmaceutical provisions. Of course, that also brings both opportunities and challenge. So how can we ensure that all people could enjoy handicap-free sort of a long life? It is a very essential goal. So that's the second transformation we need to look at. That would bring us into the whole issues about public health systems and provision of minimum health care for all. And I think that is a very large discussion, and today it's taking place this week in Geneva. The third transformation, which deal with energy, decarbonization, and sustainable industries. And that, of course, has a lot to do with, the production process and the use of energy, consumption of energy, as well as producing pollutants into the water and the air. And I think this is one area requires a lot of urgent actions by all actors, from advocacy to actual practice. And today we heard that the stakeholder groups or investors were able to oust 2 board members from the ExxonMobil, for their lack of concern or records in terms of greening their industry. And that's very exciting news. The fourth transformation to do with sustainable food, land, water, and oceans. And we have seen that in terms of the food security is looming large at the horizon. It's not only because of the COVID that impede on logistics, but also because, a lot of the small farms are having difficulties. So how can we introduce technology into this sector, and so that it would use less input and also create less pollution or destruction of the ecosystem will be the next level of next area of transformation. And the fifth one deal with sustainable cities and communities. And we know by 2050, 1 out of 7 world population will be living in the urban areas. Are our cities ready to take on such a concentration of population? And the last one, which is very important, which underpins all the formal transformation, is actually about technology, digitization, or ICT infrastructure. And if we take a look of the existing text from the indicators, and this because it is not only mentioned in SDG 17.8 about enhancing the use of enabling technology, in particular ICT. It is also very clearly, explicitly mentioned in 3 other goals and the targets. First one relates to education, which is understandable. We have seen a clear demonstration of the need for the ICT access, connectivity, and equipment. And of course, COVID has brought out the digital divide ever more sharply than before. And the second SDG that mentions ICT explicitly is in target 5B of gender equality. And the other one has to do with industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Of course, with the discussion about Industry 4.0, this is no surprising. But it's important to note that ICT in the other goals of 4, 5, and 9 actually being identified of means of implementation. And therefore, we have to redouble our effort in bringing the ICT infrastructure investment across board, because we know still 3 to 4 billion people still have difficulty getting online on a regular basis. And therefore, the 2 concepts, and this is where our presentation or panel discussion will rest on, is to say, one is the principles of leaving no one behind. And therefore, the most vulnerable groups, most marginalized countries need to be supported and through the effort. And the second one is the circularity, moving away from linear to circular economy, and efforts also need to be made by business as well as by everybody in terms from a norm point of view to think of the linking of economic growth for increased consumption of raw materials and also creation of waste. So that I will want to introduce it to Raymond for the next input, because this is where we want to look at the interactions between different stakeholders and different actors in order to make our growth more sustainable.
Actually, it's Roland who will take the next one.
Oh, sorry.
It's Roland who takes the next one, and he was polite enough to not mention, and we have the time for this, who these 3 people are. And it's Lichia Yiu, co-founder with her husband Raymond of the Centre pour le Développement Socio-Économique in Geneva, which I have the pleasure of having been invited to join several years ago. So Raymond, Lichia is, as you can see, she is Taiwan. You cannot see, but I tell you, she's Taiwanese, doctor of education, and teaches mainly in Asia and in Europe. But what she teaches is about organizational development and change. Raymond Saner is a titular professor of Basel, formerly at Sciences Po Paris, and now at Le Fana-Lüneburg, which is the Sustainability University. And he has played an enormous role. Both are based in Geneva, which means they are all connected to everyone in the United Nations agencies in that town, and have a big wide area of research and publishing. I will put the link to their research tank in the chat box. Myself, I'm a retired, as you can see, retired white hair from BASF, where I worked 30 years and took up teaching, and that is already 20 years ago. So I have more or less 2 careers, very rewarding to me. And this is why I will give an example on what BASF did in this context, cooperating, collaborating with the civil society organizations and government in a specific case. And that's what we are about. We are about saying that if you talk about the contribution of whether it be the civil society or NGO, however it, to the creation and maintenance of public goods, you must make sure that there is data, timely data, disaggregated data, that there is monitoring capacity, and there are feedbacks mechanisms in order to ensure that everyone is on board. And there are many projects. Yesterday, I was listening to I live in Mannheim, so our good Lord Mayor was presenting together with the mayor of Rotterdam and on what a town can do. And this is housing, hospitals, schools, water, sewage systems. And this is where civil society organizations are coming in. But in my opinion, as a business person, former business person, if this is governed by, let me say, a steering committee, each project needs a steering committee or governance in general, and that includes that civil societies should refrain from blocking business intervention, which, as you all have experienced many years, has taken place where businesses were shunned because they just do this for their own sake and for good reputation and whatever. And this is not true, first. And if it's true, it's the bad sheep. There are many very responsible businesses. So this is why CSOs should really take their cooperation seriously with the business sector. They should sync their contribution and their advocacy with what happens on the international scene, which Raymond will present in a minute, and they should engage with what happens on public policy negotiations on the international scene. This will give CSOs a wide range of entry points, and that will more or less secure governance, because governance is about transparency, accountability, equity, responsiveness. All this is ingrained in various United initiatives, with which I may give the word and the slide to my dear friend Raymond.
So hello to everybody. I just would like to bring to the attention of all of us, when we talk about sustainable development, we talk about the future and how to get there. And our proposal, which is also described in detail in our book about public goods, is about saying we have to find ways to cooperate together. So it should be business and CSO and governments to work together and to identify ways to improve, to change, to transform. So everybody, that's the concept of multi-stakeholder approach for development in a sustainable manner. Every stakeholder should play its role. And it can very, very easily be that there are conflicting interests between business and civil society groups or governments. And that's fine. I think it's even logical that they have different interests, but we have to figure out a way to negotiate and to find common ground so we can move beyond insisting on repeating what we already have and to hold on to what we already own, because the future, of course, means we all have to make compromises. Now, I'd like to put this into this context of the circle that you see in front of you, which is a circle that is relevant for civil society organizations or NGOs, as well as for business, as well, of course, also for governments. To apply this circle to the context of the G20, it basically means at the very top, number one, the G20 countries frame the topic each year of what should be discussed the next year. This year, the G20 presidency is with Italy. And Italy has opted for 3 topics that are being discussed by everybody, which is planet, people, and prosperity. So the issue here is how to get everybody to contribute, to say whatever their views are about the 3 topics that I just mentioned. And there, of course, we have different opinions based on the G20 governments versus the G20 and the larger, not only G20, the larger society and interest groups who defend maybe green issues, who are in defense of maybe anti-poverty or poverty reduction, pick up social issues that are not always sufficiently attended to by the governments. So at the beginning, for each cycle of the, of the G20, there are themes. These themes get to be negotiated a year in advance. So if civil society organizations have strong opinions and concerns about topics, it's up to the year before to try to influence what will be the themes of next year. And next year, the G20, for instance, will be in Indonesia. Indonesia will be hosting the G20. And the following year, in 2023, it will be India. Now, these countries, of course, are developing countries, but they have their own interests, their own concerns, but they might not cover a lot of the topics that are of very deep concerns for several of the, for instance, civil society organizations. And for this, the next step from having the initial agreement on the topics or the themes, then comes a very important moment of setting the agenda. The agenda setting is not just simply to put on paper what will be or should be done, but it is concretely then setting the working groups, the topics of the working groups, when do they meet, who will participate, and what should be the outcome of such a meeting. Now, you see, when the agenda is being set, that often also includes other stakeholders, not just the governments of the G20. So stakeholders are invited to participate. Governments are invited who are not members of the G20. So to have an influence on what the agenda will be is extremely important. The next one is then the policy negotiation, which sometimes happens already the year before the G20 meet under the auspices of one of its member countries. The policy negotiations, give you an example, are very, very important. Right now, there is discussion about should or should not the TRIPS agreement in the WTO, whether developing countries should be permitted to have a waiver so they don't have to go by the rules of patent protection. which is very crucial when it comes to the vaccine production that we all need in our countries to prevent falling ill due to COVID-19. Now, the rich, the wealthy countries already take care of vaccinating their people. To some extent, you have some countries which have more vaccines available 2 times or 3 times as many vaccines than the actual people who live in the country. However, in the developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, there are practically no vaccines. So it is not only out of concerns for humanitarian concerns and fairness, it also should be the concern for self-protection of the people in the wealthy countries, that if the poor countries are not vaccinated, the people are not vaccinated, they fall ill, the virus mutates, and we have in the developed countries new variants of the vaccines, and people fall ill again. So at the moment, this is the topic. The G20 and some countries are in favor of the waiver. Other countries, particularly those who have pharmaceutical companies, are less in favor of leashing or letting go of some of the patent protection rules. That's happening right now. So the standard setting is what is the outcome of the policy negotiation. What are the new standards, the new agreements that could have an influence for years to come? That's the moment where also, again, all stakeholders, be it business or civil society or governments, are in that sense challenged to come up with meaningful standards that will take us all into the future. If, however, things are talked about at the G20, but there is no action, right? This is at the moment the case with the COVID-19 vaccination and the idea how to produce sufficient amounts of vaccines. If the talk doesn't lead to action, it is, of course, jeopardizing the future not only of the rich, but of the poor, of all of us, of the planet. Hence, the watchdog function is to bring to the attention of the world if something is not moving. And of course, depends on which role we are playing. We might be very concerned about the lack of progress in regards to the vaccines, or maybe less concerned if we already have vaccinated our people. Now, the key point here is the production of vaccines in developing countries. Now, that's not just simply to agree to share patents. Vaccine production is manufacturing. It's quite complex. It takes a lot of know-how. It takes finance. It's to set up laboratories. So if these additional features are not provided by the wealthier countries who have the production sites, even though maybe legally speaking, developing countries get the right to not have to respect the patent, the intellectual property rules, they can't produce because they don't have the necessary resources and know-how and the people to produce these vaccines. And at the final end, when you see this closing, whistleblowing is when there is some risk, very strong risk in the future that something is just not being done to attend sufficiently to, for instance, climate change. We all have seen different groups, and Lichia mentioned that before, in our countries where there are street protests. It goes up to the board, where in Exxon 2 members of the boards have been evicted by activity shareholder groups who want to make sure that the big energy companies do more in terms of reducing CO2 rather than to do nothing or very little. So you see, that's the cycle. Just to take the example of the G20, where whether you're business or government, or a government, particularly a government that's not part of the G20 members, or on the other hand, the civil society organizations, they can come in at different steps of this cycle, which repeats itself every year as the G20 goes through a new cycle of meeting and discussing and sometimes taking action. Next slide. If you could move, yeah. Now on the left, I'd like to also bring to your attention that we are, no, not that one. Yeah, this one. You see on the left a circle, and you have four smaller circles within a larger circle. No, it's the next one, Lichia. Yeah, just to keep it here. When we talk about collective action means we should take into consideration the major actors who determine decisions that affect us all. We have multinational companies at the top. Not only actually multinational companies or transnational companies, we also have small and medium companies who produce goods and services that are ideally, of course, very beneficial for the well-being of society. They're a major actor in what we are discussing about collective action. Now, the next one going down on the right, IOs, stands for international organizations. You have the IMF, the World Bank, in Geneva, the International Labour Organization, UNCTAD, WTO. All of these international organizations have a specific knowledge, also a very specific mandate to come up with proposals to help governments to maybe find new agreements, to improve on trade, to improve on labor conditions, whatever their mandate is all about. They're there, and they ideally should be and can be and are willing to be involved in the larger discussion about how can we move our countries into a sustainable future. Then we got the governments at the bottom. We have at the UN 193 governments who are part of the United Nations. Sometimes in smaller, in other international organizations, there are fewer governments, but the governments are the ones who are, in that sense, signing agreements. When we have the Paris Club, for instance, about reduction of prevention of climate change, it's the governments who sign and in that sense are accountable and responsible to do their best to implement whatever they have signed. As I mentioned here, for instance, Paris Club is about environment. And finally, we have also, besides the three that I already mentioned, we have, now I have to look it up on my page, the INGOs. INGO stands for the International Non-Governmental Organizations. These are maybe, one shouldn't think of NGOs as just a small group of associations in our countries. We should also bear in mind some of them are as big, as influential as a transnational company can be. The Worldwide Fund, Oxfam, these are groups that are concerned about specific aspects of our world and are international because they have offices in different parts of the world. And they play a very important function because they bring to the public's attention, especially these are the whistleblowers, for instance, when it comes to grave developments that governments either cannot or are not willing to address. For instance, take just the example of migration. Migration, there is an international organization which takes care of migration of the mandate, but the actual action in the field, say the crossing of the Mediterranean, the camps where the migrants are kept, there are specific groups, NGOs, who are active on the ocean, helping the migrants, trying to prevent risky crossings of the Mediterranean, as an example, or it could be between Aden and Somalia. There are NGOs that play a very important role, not just as actors, but they play a role also in terms of proposals of mandates of sorts of research papers that are being produced by them and are often very helpful to help the international discussions and negotiations to move forward. Now, to the right, just to give an example for business. When you see in the middle, there's a line that goes from left to the right. And here you see the production process of a company. Normally, they have to get the raw materials that they use and process. They get that from suppliers. Suppliers could be in the country that the company is based in, or it could be through the supply and value chain, a far distant country where some companies produce the ingredients that the company, for instance, here in Switzerland or in Europe, uses to produce the final goods that they're selling in the market. You have the logistics, the transportation, bringing the resources and also sending off the final product to their buyers. And then you got the design and manufacturing part. You have sales. The company has to be clear about the pricing of its goods, how to maybe negotiate and bargain with their buyers. And at the end, the product use could also mean quality assurance. It could mean making sure that the products that are put into the market are safe. So it's consumer protection aspects. Now, the whole process from left to the right has each time the company, in that sense, should ask itself, are we above on the plus side or on below the negative side? That means, what is it that we're doing that's helpful for sustainable development? As you all know, we got these 17 goals, and each of these 17 goals is also part of a company's production cycle. So here, the example given, it's a hypothetical example. The company is doing the right things when it comes to infrastructure that it has put in place, the machines that it has bought to produce the goods that it is producing. The type of machines and the kind of production is not CO2, is not producing inordinately amounts of CO2. It has certain things that it is put in place that are conducive for sustainable development. On the other hand, at the bottom, you see different SDGs, goals, which are listed where the company could maybe improve. When we talk about 16, for instance, is it buying goods from countries where there are, which consist of conflict minerals? Minerals which maybe are very important for industrial production, but come from countries which are in a state of war, where child labor is used to produce whatever mineral that is being used in our industrial production cycle. So if that's so, what can it do, the company, to prevent inadvertently to be part of a conflict because it buys minerals which have been produced in a way that is disrespectful of human rights? And it can also maybe reconsider, do the people who work for the company, do they have the right knowledge, competencies? If not, what could be good to add as a training program so they could do their job in an effective manner? And 8, here we have the question about relations with staff, with employees, with workers. Is it based on fairness or is it based on exploitation? If it's exploitation, that's not sustainable. So the company should be reconsidering its salary system, the way it treats its people, and how to make it a win-win solution where the company can still produce goods at advantageous prices without having continuing to exploit others. So that's just to give you an example of how the collective approach for sustainable development, what it could entail at the international level, but even within a company, as I have just discussed with a case example of a fictitious company. That takes us to the next, yeah.
Well, next is going from a fictitious or hypothetical example of a fictitious company to a real world example of an existing BASF. This has all the features which Raymond mentioned when he talked about the value chain, where you have to start seeking your market and procuring your ingredients and talking to your customers and so on. In this case, it's, and we're talking about collective efforts. It's a business intervention where BASF partnered with a large CEO, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, in order to relieve people from being undernourished in a specific way. Micronutrients are what people in the Western world go and buy in the pharmacies as the supplements and what they have in the food because of the well-working agriculture in Africa is not present because of deficiencies of whichever kind. I had a recent example. I'm also attached to a very nice other large NGO in Atlanta and Andrew Young asked me to help with Liberia. Liberia has had a malnutrition issue because the soil in this country lacks all sorts of minerals. And we were finding out with a German producer that if we would send specific mineral ingredients into that country, we could help them prepare for being more resistant. So this is my recent experience, and this experience of BASF dates from 2007. I had left the company a long time before, and on the slides on the left side, I have listed what are the challenges if a company like BASF, which is used to have big customers and big business and large-scale products, enters into such a venture. First, it has not really had a big history in Africa, and it has to rely on new partners. That's a challenge. Another challenge is we produce vitamins, but we don't produce minerals.
Roland,
we have to find out which are the food vehicles. That's the list of challenges in the white field on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you have what in the process of making this project approved by the board. This is a company where you don't go and say, I will do this. This has to be approved by the board, especially if it's such a first moving project. The agro division of BASF does a lot of new projects in this, but this was new in 2007. So the board had to be convinced that it will help first certainly contribute to the corporate citizen profile. Business citizen BASF is a citizen, a corporate citizenship. Then it's about employee motivation, because in many companies, sustainable developers come from below, from ideas, are in the group of the employees, and so on. So, what has to be the table to convince? It went very well. In 2 years, 2007 to 2009, as said, at the time. I also have it from the literature, and I put the source in the chat box right now. This is one partnership. There are a myriad. And my good friend Rob van Tulder of the Erasmus University in Rotterdam is very active in this type of public partnerships, or partnerships with
Roland, we're losing
involving
you.
companies, CSOs, and which brings us to the last slide, which we want to show in order to around. Lichia will take over now. You unmute yourselves, Lichia. You are in hand and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Roland. First of all, thank you to remind me of the protocol and etiquette of introducing the panel, and in the surprise of realizing that we have more time, I think I was just fall out of the chair for a moment. Let me just conclude this session. So far the presentation, the discussion is really about how to promote and achieve a more collaborative relationship. Knowing that the adversarial relationship has been there for a long time, and that's also has moved our world and our society to a more sort of a healthy kind of a situation, that there's achieving some form of a power parity between the different stakeholders, governments, states, business, and civil societies, and people and community. So it has been a very healthy development, but the road has not been easy. So the question is that if we want to achieve SDGs within the limited time, we are having one more decade. Of course, looking at the MDGs past track record, to think that we will achieve all 16 goals or the 17 goals, because the last one, partnerships, is really about the means of implementation. And this is really where, our panel is situated, is to look at how to form an effective partnership so that we can actually advance a common shared agenda. Hopefully it is common and shared. But even that, I think we need to continue to work on that. We are not naive to think that everybody is into collaboration and also sort of for common good and not for profit maximization. Of course, this particular summit is very unique in the sense that we are here because we have a common concern and want to promote common good. So how do we go about doing that? And I think the dialogue is the first motion. First action. And through dialogue, we hope that we will be able to create some form of convergence in terms of perspective. To think that the interest of US or EU will be similar to Malawi, I think that is stretching the point a bit too far. But there are something common. And I think we do have the framework, as Raymond was mentioning, that in that circle of negotiation and dialogue, we need to have common framework. And I think we do have a common framework in the sense of, or in the form of, not only about 2030 agenda, but also about universal human rights. But how to move from words into action. And this is what we are here for. And I think, we need to start looking at what are the public goods that need to be provided, so nobody will be not only left behind but fall off. And I have, I think, we have all seen and can agree to that. The COVID has, set us all back. Some people claim to be a decade. I don't know because I haven't done a study on that. But I think, we know that more people have been falling back into extreme poverty and regress the gains that has been made. So the session here is to say, how can we move ahead together? And so that, that some public goods like, drinking water, toilet, school, road, electricity, and affordable housing can be made available to everybody. And so with that few words that we actually also put out a few questions for potential future research or for discussion. So the floor is open, and we welcome your comments and input. And I want to thank Roland and Raymond for your input.
I'm not seeing any question in the chat box. In my other experience yesterday, I know that. So why don't you put questions in the box? And we have a list of questions on the last slide to show what we have asked. As I said, I am from business, and I'm always asking myself, is there still a divide between civil society organizations and the business world? Some business organizations or business people say, we don't really like, though they're just troublemakers. And that's a very wrong notion. I don't like some of them. I don't like Extinction Rebellion, but you'll know them. But there are like Oxfam and World Wildlife Fund. These are which have a very close cooperation. Prince Charles of Wales is one of the founders of World Life, and he is a businessman as well, and he invites businesses, CSOs, governments into this WWF. So why is it that there is still a divide? That would be my question. And my answer may be because there are black sheep on all sides, and it's more often that you read about the black sheep. Madame Valeria Duflo said, we are working to transform tourism at the root through collective action. The industry has the potential to support the 17 SDGs. Do you have a recommendation for us? Well, if you're working in this industry, Valeria, you know very well that there are quite a lot of projects. I know one in Africa where I was involved about sustainable tourism. I have a nice friend who teaches sustainable tourism in Florence, which is a big problem because tourism in Florence is not at all sustainable. But the recommendation I can give, beyond what you already might know, is what we saw in Raymond's slide. This was a nice example of where do you into this discussion. And the slide doesn't come. It was where you see there is whistle. This is the last step. But before whistleblower to contribute, or your organization has to make sure that it is allowed or that it enters. Sometimes it's not allowed. It makes itself enter into agenda setting and standard setting. And that is what I think can come off from our presentation to your issue, Valeria. Yeah. Okay, is this a good recommendation? Look at the slide. I think it's a good slide.
Can I maybe come in with an additional suggestion?
Raymond?
Yeah, when it comes to tourism, in many parts of the world, hotels, for instance, use traditional sources of energy. which is basically not based on renewable energy, but they're consuming fossil fuels. And that costs, on one hand, is a very important part of the costing of a hotel, but at the same time, it unfortunately produces CO2 and it's not environmental friendly. So to invest in renewable energy will be a double gain, less costing, not immediately because the infrastructure has to be paid off for a renewable energy source, but over the years, in 3 or 4 years, the cost can be gotten back, and the hotel or even the whole tourism industry could contribute to reducing climate change. The other aspect is oftentimes when it comes to tourism in developing countries, the big tourism agencies produce the product, so to speak, as if nothing happens in the country that's visited by tourists because of the beautiful beaches, beautiful mountains, and so on. Sometimes the food that the tourists consume abroad is shipped along with the tourists to the destination points in developing countries. There more can be done to get the food, of course, based on careful analysis that the food is safe. But why not create opportunities by local enterprises to contribute to the product? The product here is a tourism experience for tourists coming from developed countries. So there are different ways, as Roland just mentioned before, about the slide that I introduced just two slides up from the one you're looking at, where you could analyze if you're a hotel or if you are a tourism agent. There are different things that could be done. Let me try to go back. Yeah, here, to on the right side, to look at.
I will bring it up.
No, it's okay. It's showing. Not this one. This one. Where.
It's coming. I think I will put it click because otherwise it will always move.
Okay, it's just to conclude
down.
Basically that if you're a tourist agent or a local tourist developer or a foreign tourist agency, there are ways to do things together where we produce something that's more sustainable, more beneficial, and more fair for all parties involved in experiencing a tourism experience. That would be my answer to your question, Valeria.
Yeah, I have added 2 research papers.
And Valeria, Lichia has said 2.
Yeah, 2 research papers maybe offer some thought. Because for many of the developing countries, especially in these developed countries, that they are thinking about tourism as one way of jumpstart their economy. However, if we are following up on Raymond's comment about the tourism, oftentimes in these countries are actually leaving very little for the local community to do and to produce, and so they are not participating in the potential utilization of their culture and natural resources. So that how do we think about benefit sharing could be very important. However, how to develop these local tourism related services and products will take some investment and also building capacities locally. And I think, if we look at the some of the WTO rules about, tourism related regulation and agreement, there is some restriction, but not too great restriction. So,
Okay.
indeed,
Well,
We're
Lichia,
coming to the end.
there was only one question, but I think the audience was interesting all together in here this question. And Valeria, thank you for your feedback. New KPIs, that's the one. So because key performance is not just financial. And I think this was a very good session. Thank you for all who attended. It's 11 now. We are on time. And that is very important in such a conference with 2,500 attendees. We hope you liked the idea that you attended this session. And we will see you somewhere in the conference or where else. You have our names. I put the book. You have the URL of CSENT, so we can stay in touch. Thank you very much. And
Thank
so
you,
to
Roland.
Lichia and
Thank you and
Raymond,
goodbye.
certainly.
And goodbye.